You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
Quick question. Do your end users always, and I mean always without exception, work on company-owned devices and IT-approved apps? I didn't think so. So my next question is, how do you keep your company's data safe when it's sitting on all those unmanaged apps and devices? 1Password has an answer to this question: Extended Access Management. 1Password Extended Access Management helps you secure every sign-in for every app on every device because it solves the problems traditional IAM and MDM can't touch. And it's now available to companies with Okta and Microsoft Entra and in beta for Google Workspace customers. Check it out at onepassword.com/cyberwire. That's onepassword.com/cyberwire.
Yeah, so they were targeting pan-tilt-zoom IP cameras. It's actually almost impossible to say exactly what model of pan-tilt-zoom camera they were targeting. And these vulnerabilities allow an attacker to completely compromise an IP camera, gain access to the device, pivot throughout it to the rest of the network, establish persistence, or, overwrite or insert or remove any kind of recorded media that might be stored on the device.
That's Andrew Morris, founder and chief technology officer at Grey Noise. The research we're discussing today is titled Grey Noise Intelligence Discovers Zero-Day Vulnerabilities in Live Streaming Cameras with the Help of AI.
Yeah, so at Grey Noise, we operate a very large collector network, honeypot network on the internet that detects reconnaissance and exploitation traffic on the internet. And what brought our attention to this is, we see in the wild cyber attacks every day, like literally millions of them a day, every day. And this was a very routine review of a traffic pattern that had crossed our sensor fleet, which was surfaced by our AI called SIFT. And in triaging this vulnerability, trying to basically categorize it as, what is this? We realized that there was no disclosed vulnerability for it. And so we went through a little bit of work and we identified what it was targeting and what vulnerability was, and we disclosed it to the vendor.
Well, let's walk through it together here. What exactly were they targeting, and what do you suppose they were setting out to do?
Yeah, so they were targeting pan-tilt-zoom IP cameras. And it's actually almost impossible to say exactly what model of pan-tilt-zoom camera they were targeting because the vulnerability existed in several different IP cameras, the vulnerabilities, I should say. And these vulnerabilities allow an attacker to completely compromise an IP camera, gain access to the device, pivot throughout it to the rest of the network, establish persistence, or, overwrite or insert or remove any kind of recorded media that might be stored on the device, including disabling it. So those are some of the things that the attacker can do.
Reading through the research, you noted that it would have been possible for them to make the cameras part of a botnet as well?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So the vulnerabilities that we identified lead to full camera takeover. So that means that whatever the attacker wants to do with them, they can do it with them. And unfortunately, the vulnerability affects multiple different models of camera because it affects underlying firmware that is actually white labeled, so to speak, by a manufacturer. So it actually affects multiple different models.
Right. I was going to ask you about that. My understanding is that this is an area where lots of different camera sellers will use the same parts under the hood. And so that's how you end up with these vulnerabilities spread across multiple brands and model numbers?
That's exactly right. So, we identified the vulnerability And it seems that the vulnerability is in the underlying firmware. The firmware has been licensed by multiple manufacturers. So we're still trying to kind of gauge the true impact of the bug. And it's tough. It's a tough one.
Yeah. Well, tell us about the actual vulnerabilities. What were the shortcomings here?
Yeah, so there's two vulnerabilities which combined together lead to full sort of unauthenticated remote code execution. The first vulnerability is insufficient input sanitization and access control. So basically, we're able to read a file or access a file that we shouldn't be able to read and access. And then there's another vulnerability, which is a insufficient input validation that leads to operating system command injection. So we can reach a page that we shouldn't be able to reach, and then we can use that page to inject malicious input, which leads to command injection on the camera.
I see. And what are your recommendations for folks to protect themselves here?
This is kind of tough. So if you are a customer of the IP camera, if you're somebody who has purchased or operates any of these IP cameras, I'm going to recommend two things. The first is to patch as soon as humanly possible. And then the second is to do some very mild triage to make sure that you haven't already been compromised, which is to say maybe disconnect those devices and reboot them to factory settings and then update the firmware. Reflash them, reboot them, update them, make sure to get them patched. That's pretty much all you can do. And then beyond that, it's the ball's in the court of the attacker or of the manufacturer. Sorry. And so really just make sure that you've got some ability to, if you can't patch for any reason, just make sure that you've got some ability to middle and inspect and potentially block malicious traffic that goes to those IP cameras. Make sure that any that are facing the internet that you've done some cursory triage on, because there's a very good chance that they've been compromised.
Yeah, it really seems like, this is a product category that comes up time and time again, that these cameras are a soft target for some of these hackers here.
I mean, that's exactly right. So you've got to understand that these are, Microsoft and the Linux Foundation have done hundreds of millions of dollars of research and investment into securing their operating systems. So Microsoft obviously invests billions of dollars into securing, Microsoft and Windows. Obviously, Linux manufacturers or the Linux Foundation invests quite a bit of time and energy into making sure that their kernels are up to date and are secure. But these devices, they can't run any of those operating systems. They're running a very stripped down old version of Linux. There's very limited hardware, which means there's no, space for overhead, including some of these modern security features that prevent exploitation like this, or even modern security features that allow detection and response. These devices are really hard to secure. I would argue they're impossible to secure. And this is going to continue to happen. There's very little that anybody can do about it. So unfortunately, that's just where we are.
We'll be right back. Identity architects and engineers, modernize your identity systems with Strata. Integrate legacy apps with any IDP, ensure seamless identity failover, and apply MFA without touching app code. Strata offers robust, efficient identity management, reducing tech debt and enhancing security. Gain peace of mind and operational efficiency with Strata's comprehensive solutions. Visit strata.io/cyberwire, share your biggest identity challenge, and enjoy free AirPods Pro. Optimize your identity solutions today. Visit strata.io/cyberwire. And our thanks to Strata for being a longtime friend and supporter of this podcast.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/campaign to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
I'd love to dig into some of the processes that you and your colleagues there at Gray Noise use to differentiate malicious traffic from what I assume is a high volume of routine IoT network activity.
Yeah, so at Gray Noise, what we do is we operate a gigantic honeypot fleet. And so what that does is that gives us a tremendous amount of live reconnaissance and attack traffic that's happening across the whole internet sort of all the time. And what that allows us to do is that allows us to get a sort of baseline of what normal looks like, what expected looks like. And then we can use that baseline to figure out which of our customers' networks or any of our customers' networks that are deviating really far beyond that baseline. So stated differently, we can give our customers the ability to identify targeted scanning and targeted attacks by actually subtracting out all of the internet background noise that day. And that leads to a much cleaner signal for our customers. Does that make sense?
It does. And one of the things you highlighted in the research was that you took advantage of some AI capabilities for this detection. I'm curious, why do you suppose that previous security methods might have missed this kind of exploit, and how did AI increase your odds of finding it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so how other devices missed this, I mean, it's very easy how other technologies missed this, is that this was an unknown software vulnerability. This was a 0-day. There was no signature for this. There is no way that this could have possibly been sort of a rule could have been, created on successful exploitation of this device. So that makes sense. How AI assisted us, we have a internal product at Gray Noise called Sift, which clusters network traffic and it surfaces net new traffic patterns. And at Gray Noise every day, we process over 1 billion events a day, every day. But inside of those billion events, we use AI to only surface the net new traffic patterns, which are only about 30 to 50 a day, usually less than 100 a day. And so that's a very manageable amount of data to triage as a human. And so we triage those net new traffic patterns that are created by Sift. And this was one of those net new traffic patterns that we'd never seen before. And then in investigating this, we determined that it was indeed a 0-day vulnerability. And this was confirmed by manufacturers when we reached out to them as well.
And how do the manufacturers respond? Again, with something, it's fair to say maybe a low margin product like a security camera. Do you find that they are responsive to you reaching out to them?
Yeah, I mean, the manufacturers that we worked with here were helpful. They were appreciative that we reached out to work with them. They stayed inside of the promised timelines. They didn't sort of pull any of the scummier tricks that we see people pull during responsible disclosure. So overall, I mean, hats off to the manufacturer. Again, we still haven't really identified true root cause of this bug. There's a good chance that we're going to have to cut even more software vulnerabilities to get to the root of this. But yeah, the manufacturer was very responsive and they were good to work with.
As we look forward here, how do you foresee the role of AI evolving within the industry to counteract these types of attacks?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI just helps us make, big problems a little bit smaller. Any kind of problems of scale for things that people are struggling to wrap their hands around. There's still a lot of jobs that have to be done by a person right now that we've just not exactly figured out how to kind of AI around. But there's a lot of work that I think that humans do that machines are just better off to do. And I think that the future looks like us sort of shaking some of those things out. someday we're going to realize how ridiculous it is that we, that humans ever reviewed thousands and thousands of data entries in order to, figure out which things to spend their time and energy looking at. That's something that just makes more sense for machines to do. So the way that I sort of picture it is a little bit like, before the radar was invented, we had a lot of people and a lot of planes constantly, surveying and patrolling 24/7 all the time. But then once the radar was invented, we didn't have to do that anymore because we had machines that were sort of, very kind of 24/7 monitoring to see that nothing is happening and then alerting us when something does happen. And I really do think that that's the direction that we're going to be taking things with AI even more. And so I'm excited about that. I'm very, very hopeful for the future and how, AI is going to ultimately help defenders be more secure and identify more big bad vulnerabilities before they can be used in dangerous attacks.
Our thanks to Andrew Morris from Grey Noise for joining us. The research is titled Grey Noise Intelligence Discovers Zero-Day Vulnerabilities in Live Streaming Cameras with the Help of AI. We'll have a link in the show notes. And that's Research Saturday, brought to you by N2K Cyberwire. We'd love to know what you think of this podcast. Your feedback ensures we deliver the insights that keep you a step ahead in the rapidly changing world of cybersecurity. If you like our show, please share a rating and review in your favorite podcast app. Please also fill out the survey in the show notes or send an email to cyberwire@n2k.com. We're privileged that N2K Cyberwire is part of the daily routine of the most influential leaders and operators in the public and private sector, from the Fortune 500 to many of the world's preeminent intelligence and law enforcement agencies. N2K makes it easy for companies to optimize your biggest investment, your people. We make you smarter about your teams while making your team smarter. Learn how at n2k.com. This episode was produced by Liz Stokes. We're mixed by Elliot Peltzman and Trey Hester. Our executive producer is Jennifer Iben. Our executive editor is Brandon Karpf. Simone Petrella is our president. Peter Kilpie is our publisher. And I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next time.